In today's episode of the Platform Presents podcast, I have an interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Christopher Payne, and he's hailing over as co-founder and CEO at myReach. And myReach is a software startup that is transforming the way people store digital information. We want to really look into this because obviously a lot of you guys are having to deal with a lot of folders, including myself and the team here at Pathmook. So we really want to go in what that really means, what the folks are doing at myReach, and how Christopher is thinking about growth for the company. So welcome to the show.
Hi, Lucas. Thank you very much for having us.
Good, pleasure to meet you. So maybe give us an insight. What is myReach all about in your own words?
Perfect. So myReach is a mobile app that acts a bit like a personal Google. It centralizes all your information into one place, meaning your documents, websites, pictures, contacts, everything in one place. But the key differentiation is that rather than having everything in folders like we've had for centuries, we store things just like a brain, which is why we call it the second brain, where every item that you have, every website or article, is connected by its context, just like our memory, meaning who were you with, when was it, what is it about, where were you, so on and so forth. So this way, when you're then looking for it, you no longer have to remember exactly what it was called, but simply the context around the item that you're looking for. And then one of the key differentiations that we also then have is that this network of information that you build as you use our product, you can then also visualize it in our 3D visualizer that we have in the app.
Okay, very cool. That makes a whole lot of sense. So who would you say, what type of people are benefiting most from the app? Is that, a business CEO like yourself? Is that researchers? Is that, everyone? Tell us a little bit about that.
Great. So we actually launched on the App Store in December, so only a few months ago, and we had it as a closed beta. So the initial launch that we did was purely organic through word of mouth, and there we got a few thousand users. And today what we're seeing is the most active users that we have are actually students, researchers, or actually business analysts, essentially individuals that have a high level of research and articles that they read online, and they don't have any efficient tools to then store it.
Yeah, okay, makes a lot of sense. Now, how do people hear about this? Because it's an interesting app, but they obviously have to discover it. Maybe tell us a little bit, how that works. Do they discover it through other users? Do they discover it through the web, on the app store? What's the sort of the typical journey of somebody getting started?
So what we've seen that has been the most successful for us to date is we haven't done any paid advertising and we haven't yet done any content marketing. It's been two verticals. First of all, word of mouth. So users bringing more users that enjoy the experience of the product and then talk about it with their friends. But then more importantly, it's been social media, both from our postings on Twitter or Instagram, but then more importantly, the postings that users have been doing, specifically in like Reddit, where we have a few subreddits that have been written. And through those, we've generated a huge amount of interest, or equally through TikTok, funny enough, where people are posting screen grabs of the visualizations of their networks about the movies or the articles that they've been reading or the research for a trip they're doing to Mexico, for example, more recently. And then through that, people are then signing up. So all of our growth that we've had to date has been led through our community specifically.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting for an app in particular. Like, what role do you then think plays the website in that sort of journey? Somebody discovering it through the community and getting started. Does the website play a role in the journey? Is it straight into the app store?
I think the website is critical, and that's actually why we're redoing it. Our website is something like a lot of startups. It's something you do at the beginning and then sort of forget about it. But now, as we're getting more and more traction, we've decided to completely redo our website. We might be launching it next week if we finish fine-tuning everything.
Very cool. Okay, because it very often sort of a lot of apps take it as a very second thought and afterthought, but it seems in your case it's a little bit different of a journey.
It was a second thought for too long, and has become a primary thought.
Very good. Cool. Very, very interesting. Like, what do you we always like to ask folks that are in the roles, what have you personally learned when it comes to growing an app? Maybe something that you haven't had in mind prior, sort of the biggest kind of like learning maybe that you took away from the last couple of months of growing the app, like growing the audience, growing the customers, was something that surprised you or where you found sort of a nugget of insight for yourself?
It's maybe going to be a bit obvious, or like you might have heard it before, but I had underestimated the value of the community. What I mean by that, I thought that through us publishing and then starting to post, or just through our friends and our network, we could get the users that we needed. But what we then realized is that the reality is your network of friends and contacts aren't usually the ones that are interested in your product. However, the community of the early adopters, if they're well sort of maintained, so if you have good interactions with them, they can be incredibly powerful at viralizing your product.
Very
so
cool.
It's the understatement that we had, and now seeing this is what we want to foment and grow.
Is that something you actually build into the experience in itself? So is there like, sort of mechanisms within the product that facilitate that, or enforce that, not enforce probably the right one word, but like just make it happen, let's say, in their journey?
Yeah, so what we've then done seeing this is we've added a few integrations to the product that give a direct feedback loop with our users. So then we have direct communication line with them. And then based on their feedback, then we're actively then evolving the product. So we do a launch every 2 weeks, we update it. And all of those updates, well, not all, but the vast majority of them come through the feedback that we get from our users. So I guess that the closeness that we have with them is what then has increased a bit sort of the loyalty that they have with the product, and then also them speaking nicely about us.
Cool. Very, very interesting. I would love to switch gears a little bit. Now, obviously, you're very busy. You have a lot of hats. You're a CEO and the founder of the product and the company. Where do you still read? Like, what's your go-to places? Where do you try to keep on educating yourself? Is there some, communities, places, blogs that you personally could recommend to others in your position?
So there's books, of course. Like the latest one I'm reading right now is The Hard Things About Hard Things. Excellent read. Then there's also podcasts similar to Pathmonk, like How I Built This. But then what actually is the most useful for me is the network of entrepreneurs that we have here in Barcelona, and then learning from the experiences that they have, the shortcomings they've had, and learning firsthand from them.
Very cool. I have some rapid fire questions to wrap it up for today. Are you ready for those? Go ahead. What's the last book you read? Apart from The Hard Things About Hard Things, we just mentioned that.
Wow.
Otherwise, the last podcast you listened to.
The last podcast I listened to was about the founders of Atlassian. Fascinating story between the two of them, from How I Built This.
What's one single thing your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Growth.
If there would be no boundaries in tech, what's the one thing that you would change for your role?
For my role as sorry, I didn't understand the question. As a role,
if everything is possible in tech, you have a magic wand, right? So you can change everything about your role as a, as a CEO and founder and all the daily tasks that you have. What's the one thing you would fix?
HR.
Makes sense. If there would be no boundaries, oh, sorry, just into that one. What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about the company?
Again, it's HR, hiring, expanding the team in the areas that were sort of lacking and finding the right individuals to join. Anything you've learned on that? Because obviously a lot of like founders who are listening in run into that. Like, what have you been coming up with or learning as a sort of vehicle to help to grow the team? So for me, the key learning has been with time is the process pre-final stage. So the tests that you do, the staging of the interviews, so professionalizing it rather than just basing it on one interview or two interviews, having a more rigid and structured approach where you can then filter and clearly identify the strengths of each of the candidates. Very cool. Last question. If today would be your very first day starting to work on myReach, what's the one advice you would give yourself? To launch sooner. Launch sooner. You were working on a beta or prototype for a while prior? Exactly. So we spent 3 years developing it. The first year we spent developing a B2B solution for law firms specifically or companies. There it took a while to launch. Once we launched, we then understood what we had to improve, and then we pivoted to this newer version. And we could have launched 6 months ago, to be honest, but then we kept on delaying it, wanting to have another functionality, another feature. So what I would tell myself if I had to start all of this again, it would be to launch faster and launch quicker. Very cool. Really appreciate you taking the time, Christopher, today to give us an insight into myReach. I want to give you the very last word, right? If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about myReach today, what's the one thing they should remember? So in simple terms, myReach is Google for your stuff. Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathmonk Presents. Perfect. Thank you very much, Lucas.